fire protection engineers, they are doing a great job when nobody is talking about them. It's only when there's like the Grenfell Tower fire in England. Why were there not more exits? What was the sprinkler system like? That's when, they come under fire. No pun intended, but.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Megan Henry, and today I'm joined by Riley McManus. And Riley's a little bit different from my typical guest because he's not a lawyer, he's not in claims, he's an engineer, and he's a risk management professional for an insurance company. So what he kind of does is he goes into either insureds or potential insureds businesses and assesses their risk when they're either renewing their policy or going to get a new policy. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have him come on and talk about what it is that he looks for and how he helps businesses mitigate their future risks. So with that, let's bring him in. Good morning, Riley. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you on because you're a little bit different than my standard guest. And you and I have talked about this a few times because you're an engineer by trade. So I love having you on to talk about, the risk that you see with insureds or potential insureds for your company.
Yeah, no, it is interesting to hear that I'm an engineer by trade because I know that is what I studied in school. It was actually civil engineering, but I always tell people I think I would be a horrible civil engineer. It was kind of one of those majors that I lost interest in about halfway through and kind of fell into a different major in fire protection engineering and took some classes there. So I'm sure we'll kind of dive into that stuff, but it was just interesting to hear that.
Yeah, well, that's actually a perfect segue because I did want to get into your background. So, so as you said, you went to school for civil engineering. So what was your decision process going in? So as a way of background, I have a lot of lawyers on this podcast and we talk a lot about how they became lawyers. Some had parents who were lawyers, some had no lawyer in their family. And the same thing when I have people on from claims, they're like, oh, I came from a long lines of claims, people working insurance and claims. Other people I just fell into it. So I'm always interested to see how anyone ended up in their career. But starting out, when you went to college, were your parents engineers or did you just feel like I'm good at math? This is a good career path for me. It's a good major.
Yeah, I would say it's more of the latter. When I was in high school, even middle school, but high school is when I started to kind of take things more seriously. I found that I not only enjoyed math, but it was one of my strong suits. I excelled in that area more than I did in other subjects. And once I started realizing, wow, I'm almost 18 and going to be going to college, I need to start figuring out what I want to do with my life. So I kind of went to some of my teachers that I had a good relationship with and asked them, where does someone like me usually go in terms of careers and college majors and all that? And I was pretty consistently pushed to engineering. And I think a lot of that just has to do with how I interacted with them in class. If they, said, this is a universal law of math, I would kind of question that, go, why? I want to understand. If you're going to tell me that I have to accept that, I want to understand it. So they kind of saw my interactions with them and said, you're probably going to be going engineering. So I went in as an undecided engineering major because I didn't even really know what engineering was. I just knew, okay, it must be kind of math based and involve kind of solving problems. So I went in undecided, took some intro classes and talked to a lot of people at my school and decided that civil would be the route to go because it was so broad. And I felt that I wanted to keep a lot of doors open so that I could continue to learn and then hopefully eventually find an area that I felt comfortable with and wanted to pursue a career in.
So it's funny because I'm actually a math major and I'm a lawyer now. So that's a weird transition.
Yeah, definitely. That is interesting.
But I'm always, and my school didn't have engineering. And I look back and think engineering probably would have been a really good path for me, but I just didn't, I was a science path at the time. So, you had mentioned earlier though, you started in civil engineering, then you kind of fell out of love with it. So what happened there?
Yeah, so this kind of coincided with another strange path of events that happened, which is when I applied to colleges using the common application that is used in high school, there was a box when I was applying to WPI. And side note, I applied to WPI because I had family members that had gone there, majored in engineering, and I visited with them and just really loved the community feel. But as I was applying to WPI through the Common App, there was a question that said, would you like to be considered for the 5-year master's program in fire protection engineering? And it was a yes or no question, which I just saw that as there's no risk. Why would I choose no? So I hit yes and I moved on. And I had totally forgotten that I did that. And when I was about 2 weeks out from going to school for my freshman year, I got a letter in the mail that said, congratulations, you've been accepted into the master's program for fire protection engineering. And I was like, okay, that's strange. I don't even understand where this letter is coming from, because again, I had forgotten that I clicked that box. But I said, okay, I guess I got accepted, so I might as well check it out. And so I met some people at school who were involved in that program, and they mentioned an introductory class in fire protection engineering. So I said, I might as well take it. And I took that, I believe, my sophomore year. And it was a really fun class. You got to light a bunch of stuff on fire, see how compartments burn. And I was like, this is really cool. So while that's happening, I'm also losing interest in my civil engineering classes.
Well, of course.
So
it's like fire versus paper.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was the perfect storm that led me to say, I'm probably going to start pursuing something in fire protection engineering as opposed to civil. And while I didn't finish my master's in fire protection engineering, I was able to take a few courses and then do both of my capstone projects in fire protection engineering. So that's what kind of loosely led to me being involved in a career that has to do with fire protection. So from there, I started looking at internships, and one of the guest instructors that came to the introductory fire protection engineering course, he worked at NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association. And he said, you should come and interview and check it out. It's a really great organization. They basically are the company that produces the codes that a lot of buildings need to abide by to get their certificates of occupancy. And I met a lot of great people there that had come from so many different areas of fire protection. So it was kind of the perfect starting internship. And generally speaking, there's kind of two routes that fire protection engineers go from WPI. And the one that I was most interested in was consulting, where you'd kind of go out and you would be helping owners design sprinkler systems for the types of occupancies that they're looking to construct. And that was kind of the route I thought I was going to go. But I had made a really good connection with one of the employees at NFPA who said, you should also check out insurance. And when I heard that, I kind of, in the back of my head, I was like, insurance sounds pretty boring. And I even say that to people now. If you told me while I was in college that I'd be working in insurance and let alone enjoying it, I would have laughed. Because I picture insurance policies and say, this is extremely boring. I would never want to work in insurance. But sure enough, I said, all right, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He seems to know me pretty well and understand what I want out of my career and out of my life. Let's give it a shot. So I did another internship with a large property and casualty insured, not the one that I'm currently working for, but a different one. And I just immediately kind of fell in love with the job. You're in the field, you're going to manufacturing plants, you're kind of learning how odd things are made and trying to determine, based on the equipment here and the processes that they're following, what is the most likely fire or explosion scenario. And if that happens, what is going to happen to the building? Is there a sprinkler system that's adequately designed? Are we going to lose the entire building, half the building, 5% of the building? I kind of just loved it. And from there, I never looked back. So I apologize for the long-winded answer, but that's how I kind of fell into the insurance industry, like a lot of other people do.
No, because I love it. Because I a lot of themes we see on this podcast is people ending up in the insurance industry, by accident or by, an odd path, like not odd path, but like it's not always a straight shot, and I love hearing everyone's stories, how they got where they are and the different things they do now that they're in the insurance industry, because it is so multifaceted. Like it is not just claims, it's not just underwriting, like there's so much going on. And that's what I really like to highlight here too, is that like there's something for everybody.
Absolutely. 100%.
So I want to fast forward a little bit. Well, so in your role now, are you at your, and I don't remember if we're allowed to say your current company or not.
Yeah, no, I work for Selective Insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember what was allowed. So now at Selective, are you just assessing it? So your role is to assess the risk of insureds and potential insureds, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Is it just fire risk or multi risks?
No, so it's multiple risks. It's pretty much all lines of business. When I came to this company, my background was only in property, so loss prevention engineering for property risks. So I was looking at fire and flood and that type of stuff. But when I came here, I had to kind of learn these other lines of business: workers' compensation, general liability, auto. So it's been definitely a learning curve,
Sure.
and there's similar concepts that can be applied. But my background was only in property prior to here.
Okay. So before we jump into what you do at Selective, I wanted to make sure we touched on the fire risk, because I work on a lot of cases that involve fires in homes or buildings, and I find them to be the most fascinating types of cases, because you go in, you have, I don't know, a slew of a bunch of attorneys, a ton of experts, fire experts, everyone representing a different product and trying to figure out what product could have caused or contributed to the fire. I find it absolutely fascinating, because just the amount of detail that goes into examining a scene to try to figure out what was the cause. I love it.
Yeah.
I love the process. It's usually multi-days. You get to know everybody there. So I can understand why why this was something that struck your interest in college and after, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely is. And one of the things that I found so fascinating very early on is there's still so much we don't know about fire, just down to the molecular level, like the reactions that are happening in a flame, which personally, once it gets that detailed, I kind of lose interest a little bit. I'm kind of a top-down processor.
Surface level, yeah.
Yeah. I like to understand the big picture of what's happening, but yeah, diving into some of that chemistry and what actually happens based on how much oxygen availability there is and so many other factors, definitely really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've been at so many scenes that it's like, okay, this part of the living room caught on fire, and pulling everything apart and finding like the one little, connector, the outlet cord that's frayed. Like, okay, we know the spark happened here, and this is what ignited the fire. I don't know. I can never do it enough.
Yeah, no, it's a fun process. Very difficult though. I give fire investigators a lot of credit. We did one small project in that introductory class that I was referring to, where we had to just look at pictures from a fire scene and determine where the fire originated, and it was not easy. So a lot of clues, but to really come down to a decisive answer and say this is where it started and here's how I know, not very easy.
Yeah, and one thing I've found is it's also a very small community. It seems that everyone, like at least by region, like when you go to one of these inspections, everybody knows everybody, and if you're like the last defendant to get notification of it, you might not, you're gonna be scrambling to find an expert because they're already retained, they're already there.
Yeah.
So I think maybe you need to get out there and start promoting fire protection as a more of a career path, because I think there's a need for more individuals to do this.
Yeah, there definitely is. I think one of the contributing factors there is that there's not too many programs across the country that are fire protection engineering based. I know my school, obviously Worcester Polytechnic Institute, they have their program. The University of Maryland has a great program as well. And there are a few other schools. I don't want to misquote
Sure.
what they are, but yeah, there's really not that many programs across the country. So that definitely contributes to everyone kind of knowing each other.
Yeah, because I mean, especially because right now it seems like it's mostly retired like fire chiefs, and it's not generally a younger population.
Sure.
Anyway, I digress. So so how did you end up at Selective? What was your path there?
Yeah, so after I had kind of finished a couple internships and realized that insurance is where I wanted to be, I started off at another large carrier doing property loss prevention engineering, as I said, where the main focus was property. So I was going in and I didn't really care about their auto exposures. I wasn't asking them about their workers' comp exposures. It was just looking at the building, the contents, what type of fire explosion we might experience, and how do we best mitigate both the likelihood of that happening and the severity of it if it does happen. So from there, I was actually contacted by my current manager to just say, hey, are you interested in potentially checking out another opportunity? And I've always, going back to checking that box on the common application, I've always been someone who doesn't shy away from an opportunity to just learn about what's out there. It's another one of those zero risk decisions. So I met up with him and talked about the opportunity and thought, I do want to stay with what I'm doing because I do like property loss prevention. But, maybe the reasons that I like that would be the same reasons that would allow me to enjoy doing other lines of business like auto and workers' comp. So I said, yeah, you know what, let's give it a shot. And that was back in, I believe, August of 2019 is when I started at Selective, and I've been here ever since.
So can you explain for our listeners, like what does a day look like for you? Like, what do you do every day?
Yeah. So, so basically my role is kind of to be the eyes and the ears for underwriters at our company, and to provide like a technical expertise in certain lines of business to both our underwriters as well as our insureds. So what that comes down to is you're kind of acting both as a consultant for our insureds to try to help them mitigate their losses, and also to kind of collect more information for our underwriters. They see a company on a piece of paper, but we realize that there's only so much a piece of paper can tell you. So a lot of it has to be done in the field, interacting with the client, making sure you understand what it is that their business does and what the potential risks are that are associated with that. So on any given day, there's generally three main things that I'm doing. If you think about a specific business that we insure, and I deal with hundreds of these companies, but let's just look at one. The process is I'm either preparing to go do a survey, and a survey is just what we call a visit to our insureds. So I'm either preparing for that survey by doing some preliminary research on the company, the lines of business that we insure, what the risks associated with that industry tend to be, and conversing with our underwriters as far as do they have any specific needs. From there, the second thing that I would be doing is actually performing the survey. So I'm out at the insured site, walking through their building, asking them about what they do, and gathering the information that I need to gather. And the third thing would be the final step is report writing. So I kind of take all of that information that I gathered during the survey preparation process, as well as the actual survey, and I consolidate it into just the pertinent information that our underwriting team needs. And from there, I kind of send the report in, and if there are any recommendations that we made to the insured, that's something that I'll follow up with in a few months or a few weeks, depending on how important the recommendation is.
Yeah.
And then I kind of move on to the next company.
So is the process that you go through for current insureds or potential insureds or both?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. It's a good question. At the start of my time with Selective, it was mostly insureds, so people that we already insure. And the reason for that is because I was obviously new to these other lines of business, such as auto and workers' comp and general liability. So while I was learning these lines, I also had to kind of learn what Selective's appetite was. If you compare
Yeah.
Selective to any other company, there might be some similarities, but there's also many differences. There are types of risks that we look at and say, we're not going to insure that. It's not our specialty. We don't have,
Yeah.
we don't have the internal processes to handle that. Whereas another company might say, that's our wheelhouse. We're going to insure that all day long. So over time, as I got more comfortable with what our appetite is, that's when kind of our management team said, okay, he's getting a feel for this. Now we can start to send some prospects his way
Okay.
and sort of start to trust his opinion as to whether or not we should be pursuing this specific business. So over time, it's gotten to be both, but I would say still the majority is current insureds.
So, with that, you're learning a lot of times about a whole new kind of business, a whole new type of product. So it's like your gears are always moving. You're never getting flat.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I love about the job. I was beginning to be a little bit nervous when I was getting closer to graduation that I was going to end up in a job where I'm behind a computer all day,
Yeah.
doing nothing but designing systems or something like that. And I realized that I'd need human interaction. I need to be client facing.
Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite parts of the job.
So it's funny. I was in a similar situation. After college, I opted to go try to get a PhD in neuroscience and pharmacology, like some
Oh,
crazy
nice.
person. And I realized very early on in that, when I'm sitting in a lab being like, this is not the place for me. It was very similar. Like, I felt very closed off and secluded because I'm like, I need to be in front of people. Like, I am not good with just in front of beakers and data. And I think after like 6 months I left the program because I knew it just wasn't a great option for me. I never thought I was gonna be a lawyer, and then here I am.
Yeah. So can I ask you this? Like, what is it about neuroscience that made you want to pursue that in the first place? Like, what was your expectation versus, what the reality was?
So my expectation, what I thought going in, I guess I went in with a clouded mind. I thought it would just be, whenever I took science classes in undergrad, it was still very interactive in the classes, and even the labs felt interactive. When I went into my PhD program, it was just the classroom was still interactive, but the lab was very solo. Like, sometimes I'd be the only one in the lab just working by myself, or everyone would have headphones on and not speaking to one another, or they didn't speak English. So it was
Yeah, sure.
it. And I just also found, I don't think I thought it all the way through. I thought at first I was going to go to medical school. I pivoted, and I just didn't think of how I didn't really enjoy the process. Like, I didn't enjoy doing this one thing over and over and over again to find out some tiny, tiny little result that's part of a much larger, project. And
Yeah.
that, and I didn't have that passion. Like, I remember at one point, like, my mentor was like so excited about this tiny positive result, and I was like, ugh. Like, why do we care so much?
Yeah. Isn't it amazing though, like, that there are people that just think so differently from us and are motivated by such different. I've always found that extremely interesting because it's so necessary. We need people that are, really interested in that little niche.
Yeah, and I'm so glad they're there. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's not me.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I digress, but I think it's very important to to be, look at yourself and be like how you did. Like, you're so glad that's not the path you took, because you'd probably be unhappy right now. And then you found something that really works for you and your personality. Like, not all engineers have to sit behind a computer,
Right.
and so and like, for me, I have a very logical and analytical mind, but I also am pretty personable. So I don't also need to be behind a computer. Like there was another, I never thought being a lawyer was something I was able to do until I like later on in my career, or like my job after I left that PhD program, I realized, oh, like you don't need to be a history major to be a lawyer,
Right.
which is what everyone, in college was a history major or philosophy major or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny.
So at any rate, so you also, what I'm hearing though is like, so you visit these insureds or potential insureds, but I'm more so thinking about insureds. Like you keep seeing them over and over, so you're developing a business personal relationship with them. Like you get comfortable with these individuals, so you can really talk to these business owners or about what you're seeing on when you're on your site visits, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and
Mm-hmm.
it's different with every person that you interact
Sure.
with. So it's definitely a challenge. But what it seems like to me, and I'm relatively new to this career. I graduated college in 2018, so I'm by no means an expert at what I do. I'm still very
Yeah.
much in the development phase. But what it seems like to me is that if I were to stay in this position at this company for 20 years, there would be repeat visits,
Mm-hmm.
and probably a lot of them. So I would be going out to insureds and saying, "Hey, how's it going? I haven't seen you in about 3 years. Just kind of coming in to check in, see how everything's
Yeah.
going, see if there's any questions you guys have, et cetera, et cetera." But right now, what I have to do is try to establish that consultant,
Trust.
team member type
Mhm.
of vibe early on. And the reason being is because I've found that when I make a recommendation to any business owner, depending on how I deliver that, it can be off-putting to them, and it could kind of
Sure.
seem like I'm telling them how to run their business,
Yeah.
when obviously that's not what I'm doing. I will never have the expertise that they have. This is their livelihood, and they know it better than I ever will. What I bring to the table is a view from the insurance industry.
Mhm.
So if we are talking about, say, an auto body shop, and we insure 1,000 of those, we can look at the losses that we've had in the past and say, okay, this seems to be kind of a trend. Having this type of suppression system in this paint booth seems to not be working. So let's make the auto body shops that we go to, let's make them aware of that this is a potential problem. So we kind of bring in that insurance knowledge and claims knowledge to try to prevent this from happening to other people. Because one thing that we're on the same page about, between me and the business owner, is we don't want you to have a loss. Obviously,
No.
that hurts our company monetarily, and it could also hurt your business. And some people would say, well, that's what insurance is for. The problem with that is that you can't you can't just solve everyone's problems by throwing money at a loss that happens.
No.
Yes, it'll help the problem monetarily, but there's also
Yeah.
reputation of the business owner, that is at stake, and that can't really be indemnified.
Yeah. But I'm sure you do get, like how you mentioned, you do get some pushback, because I think, say the owner of the auto body shop, like they might have been running this business for maybe 30 years, and maybe you know, either switching over to Selective, or they've had, their policy with Selective, but you guys are, reviewing their policy for renewal, and then you find this issue, and they might, I imagine you get some pushback on some things. Like, we've used
Yeah,
this thing for 20 years. Why is it suddenly a problem now?
yeah, no, you're hitting the nail on the head. I think that's kind of a pretty common theme that you'll find, just in general, not even talking necessarily about insurance, but we as humans kind of tend to have um, this mindset of, well, I've always done it this way and nothing's ever gone wrong. So
Right.
if it isn't broken, why fix it? So I think the key to kind of being successful in a role like mine, specifically when it comes to giving recommendations, is to approach things with empathy. You have to kind of step into their shoes and realize that they've been doing this a certain way for however many years they've been in the business, so it can be off-putting for someone to come in and say that they should change something. But yeah, I think in general, um, it is kind of just that mindset that needs to be broken down a little bit, and you just need to do it in a way that you're approaching it as a member of their team rather than someone who's coming in and saying, this is wrong, you need to change this. So yeah, a lot of it just comes down to those soft skills and having a bit of empathy.
So the big question is what, I'm sure you've encountered this, that you have, insureds who are like, I'm not going to change that. And I mean, at that point, it's going to have to affect their premium. Their premium's going to be higher if they're going to have something that you've assessed as a risk or a higher risk, or I mean.
Yeah, no, I knew this question was going to come up because it comes up from our insureds a lot.
Yeah.
Which is, I'll make a recommendation and they'll say, well, will my premium go down? And the reality is, and I have to reply with this, is I actually don't, and this isn't a lie. I don't have control over the premium.
No, it's not your job.
Right. And it's interesting, and I understand it from the insured's perspective, because if I was them, I would probably be asking the same question.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that's someone else's job, and it's also kind of necessary to kind of have like that separation of power, because it kind of helps avoid conflicts of interest or coercion, because I'm the one physically there sitting in the office with some of the owners of these businesses. And we understand not everything is black and white. We're not just going to necessarily say this has to be done and it's got to be done tomorrow. Generally speaking, accounts are I guess proactive enough to try to understand why the recommendation's being made, and if they feel like they can't do all of that within the next year, but maybe they can take steps in the right direction, that all gets factored in.
Yeah, of course, because there's a financial aspect to this too. Like, you're asking or suggesting to a insured, like, hey, like this thing, and this thing, and it's a total of whatever, $60,000. Like, they might not be able to put out that money to fix all those or change those three things in that year or that, fiscal calendar, whatever it may be. So they might need to spread it out. You're not trying to make your businesses go broke.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been an interesting change that I've experienced in my career as well, is going from larger property and casualty carriers to Selective, who tends to do kind of smaller end business and middle market. There's not as much of the economies of scale that I was used to coming from the larger carriers, where you could make a recommendation for a $500,000 change, and usually they'd go, okay, yeah, we'll have to take a look at next year's budget, but I'm sure it can be done. Now a recommendation like that for some of the insureds that we're seeing is out of the question. So that's a constant conversation that we're having with our underwriting team, and my managers, other safety management specialists, and everything.
But you also must, with these smaller businesses, like, I'm sure you see a lot of like family run businesses, or and you must feel like not a close knitness, but like, you feel like, look, they've built this themselves. It's not a giant corporation, and like they really put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. So you have to appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's another, you talk about things I like about this job. It's another amazing aspect of it, is you're going in and, learning how things are done, and to see some of these businesses that are, third or fourth generation owned, that started in, 1911. It's amazing. It really is amazing. Because like I said, I'm kind of a top-down processor. I look at the big picture first. So I generally start the conversation just by asking them about the business. When did it start? And how did it get to where it is today? And hearing some of those stories is amazing. Even if I wasn't doing it as a career, I love having those conversations.
Yeah. My family has a restaurant that's been around since 1928. So I understand that.
Oh, nice.
I understand the background, and then also the resistance to change.
Yeah, sure.
I see that as well. There's a lot of resistance to change how things were always done. And I think that comes hand in hand with, I think, older established, businesses. It's just a lot of times.
Yeah. So what kind of restaurant is this? I want to hear about it.
It's a hot dog restaurant. And it's actually kind of in your neck of the woods. It's in
Oh
Connecticut.
yeah, we talked about
Yeah.
this. Yes. Yes, I
Yes.
totally forgot the name of it, but it's that's something I want to try. I'm gonna put
Yes.
that down on my list to try it next
It's
time
yeah,
I
Blackie's hot dogs in Cheshire, Connecticut for everyone listening. Just don't go on Fridays. That's one of the things that we don't change. We're closed on
Blackie's.
Fridays.
Okay. All right.
and there's also no French fries. Another thing that we don't change. There's no French
Okay.
fries.
So yeah, hot dogs is the focus. That's their.
Yes.
All right. Great. I'm
Yes.
definitely gonna try it, and I'm gonna let
Yeah.
you know how it is.
You better.
And I'll give honest feedback too. So if it's bad, I'm gonna tell you. But
And let
there's
me
no
know
way
if
it's gonna be
you
bad. Hot dogs are so good.
do me a courtesy if you see any risks while you're out there. Just let me know. Give me a call. Like,
Yeah,
the
sure.
parking lot's looking a little wrangly.
I definitely will. Yeah.
So speaking of that, like, if you're able to share, are there any, general red flags that, you see when you go onto a property that, either something you see a lot or something you're like, oh, like, is an issue that you can talk about? I don't want you to give any specifics about any particular insureds.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's kind of a tough question to answer just because of the variety of businesses that we insure, as well as what lines of business are we insuring. So there's so many different things to look at. So if I could give you kind of a general answer to that question,
Yeah,
I would say pride of ownership is generally, if there's a lack of pride of ownership and attitude of management, that's generally a red flag for me. If you ask someone else in my position, they may have a totally different answer. But I've found that in general, when you walk into a business and it's pretty clear that they have a lot of pride in what they're doing, things are kept clean, and they're proactive. They have all their policies ready, sitting in front of them to talk about. That usually means that they're going to be a pretty good risk. They're going to be willing to work with you, and that's just what I've noticed. However, you can't just see the pride of ownership and just say this is a great risk, lower their premiums, like do whatever you can. This is amazing. You have to kind of pierce the veil and go a little bit deeper and try to figure out what's really going on, because they could be as proactive as they want. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. So, I tend to, I think I would agree with that though too, because if you go to a place and you like, let's just take the auto body shop like as an example. Like, generally speaking, they're a little grummy around the edges, but if you're gonna, it's like clean as like you would, cleaner than you would expect like an auto body shop to be. You see people there, you see the safety measures in order. No one's walking under cars or whatever it might be. Like, that has to that first impression has to speak a lot to you.
Yeah, it's definitely a management culture that really tends to start at the top of these organizations. If there's an owner who really cares about his business, cares about his employees, that's going to be an operation that, generally speaking, is pretty well run.
So, and I don't know if this is something you can speak to as well, or it kind of goes hand in hand with that, but is there any advice that you would give to a business owner as how to do their best to mitigate their risk before you come to their property and give an assessment of what looks good, what doesn't look good?
Yeah, sure. I think you almost kind of answered the question in the question, which is before I come, what can be done. So generally speaking, take pride in your operation, which is obvious to anyone. That's kind of good advice. No matter if you're a business owner or you're just going to school, take pride in what you're doing. But I would say if there could be more specific advice, it would be to seek outside input. This might be, we've seen owners of companies, they'll hire third-party safety companies to come in and just give their opinion as to what can be done to improve the safety. They could call OSHA and say, hey, we want you to come do an inspection. We want you to tell us if anything's wrong. Listen to new hires. If you hire somebody from the same industry and they're coming into your organization as a new hire, ask them, do you see anything that we're doing that you think could be improved? And that might be safety related, that might be business related, but I think being open-minded to change is difficult to do, but necessary. And you don't always have to take the advice. Some of the advice might end up being wrong, but to be open to it, I think, is your best bet.
Yeah. I would say that's a good theme, is just to be open to change. And I'm sure that is probably difficult for a lot of business owners, especially like the ones that we've been talking a lot about, is that have been around since 1908. And they, again, like how we mentioned earlier, they've always done it this way. It might be hard to embrace, a change or something they didn't even realize would be, you know, a risk. Now,
Yeah.
do you ever have to go, or do you ever do, a site visit, after a claim has come in to assess something that, or is that a different department?
So it is generally a different department, but it's not to say that that we don't attend those things. So I have done that. And it is always interesting to see the things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Another strange aspect of my job is that most accounts that I go and visit, whether I go there or not, most accounts will not have a serious loss.
Yeah.
If you look at any 10 or even 20-year period, most of those accounts are not going to have a very severe loss. So there's been times in my career where I've kind of started to question, like, is what I'm doing really making an impact? And what I've learned just based on seeing some of the losses that have happened, whether it be, for our company or another company, or just in general, you see stories on the news, is that if I can even prevent one significant loss, that's a win. The tough part is you don't know if you've prevented that loss. So it's kind of, and I learned this kind of early. Exactly.
Yeah.
I learned it kind of early in fire protection engineering. Is fire protection engineering majors and people that are actually, professional fire protection engineers, they are doing a great job when nobody is talking about them.
Yeah.
It's only when there's like the Grenfell Tower fire in England. When that happens, now everyone's looking at, whoa, who designed this building? Why were there not more exits? What was the sprinkler system like? That's when, they come under fire, no pun intended, but yeah, it was pretty good. Take credit for that. But yeah, so that's kind of the interesting part of the job, but I find a lot of solace and pride in the fact that I'm, doing things to try to help these businesses prevent that severe loss that could really cause a lot of financial and reputational damage. So.
Well, and that's such a good point too, that, you don't have a measure, a true measure to be like, it is what I'm doing successful. But if you're not, or less often seeing major losses after, you or your counterparts have, assessed a business, something has to be working.
Yeah, definitely.
So of course, my follow-up question is, have you had, or can you recall a situation you've made a recommendation and you've had them say, we can't do that right now. We don't want to do that right now. We don't have the money to do that right now. And then you see a loss result out of a recommendation that you've made. Now, of course, I don't want you to talk about any particular insureds or anything, but have you seen that scenario arise?
Yeah, nothing specific is coming to mind.
Okay.
And the tough part about that is I might make a recommendation and they might not comply with it, and I wouldn't get notified if they had kind of a smaller loss. I would probably get notified if, their whole building burnt down. But yeah, so I can't think of anything specific. That's not to say that it hasn't happened. It's just not what I'm paying attention to on a daily basis. I'm preparing for my next survey, or going out to perform these surveys. So that's just not something I'm commonly looking at.
Now, other than what we had touched on, taking, being proud of your business, taking ownership of your business, are there any other steps that a business can take to mitigate the overall risk, like any other risk factors that they can do themselves to help prevent potential future losses?
Yeah. So there's plenty of online resources depending on what type of specific risk you're looking to mitigate. Even just going onto Google and typing in emergency management plans if you want to know about how
Yeah.
to get your building back up and running if there was ever a wide power outage. Are there companies that rent generators that I could use temporarily to keep things running? So depending on how specific the risk is that you're looking to mitigate, you can search online. Another thing I would say, just being an employee of Selective and some other insurance companies in the past, is reach out to your insurance company and see if there's anything they can do to help. There's a lot of free services that we offer. We have a telematics device that we offer to our insureds for free. So telematics, that's the technology that can go into your car and allow management to sort of see where the vehicles are. Are they speeding? Are the drivers using their cell phones while they're driving? That type of stuff. And a lot of them, like I said, will be free. So I would say reach out to your insurance carrier because they likely have plenty of things that they can help you with at no cost to you.
And that's such a good point. I have one of those things in my car, but it always makes me a little nervous.
Yeah. I was gonna say, how do you like it? Because we have it in our cars as well. And it can be a little bit unnerving at times.
Well, fortunately, I don't drive very often anymore. So, I'm my potential exposure to me doing poor, making poor decisions is low because my car's mostly in my driveway.
Yeah, it's a cool technology though, because I've found that since I installed it, it's not even so much that I know that it's being tracked. It's kind of just the awareness that it's there that kind of makes me say, okay, don't be as risky as you may have in the past. Don't take that phone call while you're driving. Just pull over in a couple minutes and call them back. So
maybe you don't need to do a quick U-turn here.
Right, exactly.
So, and I feel like I know the answer, but how has COVID affected, your ability to do your job?
Yeah, COVID definitely changed things. And I think that they were changes that were already coming. It's just COVID accelerated them. So typically before COVID, I would say 95% of the surveys that I would do were in person. I would go out, ask them questions, even if their building was so small that it wasn't really a concern to us and we could have gotten most of the information over the phone. There's a lot to be said for putting a face to the name, going out and actually sitting down physically with the insured. But when COVID struck, I think it was literally on St. Patrick's Day in 2020. That's when I got a call from my manager saying, stop going out on the road. We're in lockdown. So it was very doomsday-ish. Yes. It was a strange feeling to hear that because I just never expected to hear it. But now all of a sudden we were thrust into this world that we can no longer physically visit our insureds. And that lasted for 5 months, I want to say. So immediately our internal teams kind of started looking at some of the technologies that could be used, WebEx, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. It's still the majority of the time that we're going out in the field, but there's plenty of accounts that we say, you know what, they're located 3 hours away. I could get on a video call with them, and we've found that we can still pretty effectively do our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of us have discovered things that, again, like embracing. We don't have to do it because this is the way it's always been done. We're very similar to that company that's been around since 1900, that it's hard for us to embrace change until we're forced to embrace it. I mean, I felt like this has happened with the court systems, just because we've always had these, conferences in person doesn't mean we need to do these 10-minute conferences in person. It's a giant waste of everyone's time. So the pivot is certainly important, but I'm sure for you, the ability to be able to go physically back into your insurance buildings is helpful to
absolutely
get a full assessment of what's going on.
Yeah, and it's typically the accounts that are pretty auto heavy or workers comp heavy that we can more effectively do virtual surveys. When it comes to a property heavy account, we tried the whole, send us pictures of your sprinkler risers, send us your sprinkler plans, send us a couple pictures of, this exposure and that exposure. And there's only so much you can get. They could be behind you. There could be 10 employees that are smoking cigarettes next to flammable liquids. It's a bit of an extreme example, but it gets the point across is when it comes to property, you do kind of have to physically be there to really get a good sense of what's going on.
Particularly if I can imagine it's much more difficult if it's a potential new insured, because you've never been there. If it's a renewal, I mean, you might already have schematics and you might already have that information. So maybe an in-person, visit isn't absolutely necessary, but at new insured, I imagine like you don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, there's plenty of times where, during that 5-month period where there were prospective insureds, and we had to do a lot of internet research, using Google Earth and using all these different technologies to try to understand what we could about the building. And there were underwriters on the calls and safety management specialists on the calls, all just kind of collaborating to try to figure out what the best move is. And it's difficult, but I think companies and people in general are pretty adaptive, and we've all done some pretty amazing things. Not just our industry, certainly plenty of other industries that really held the world together during a crazy time. So it's impressive to see happen.
Yes, and now I think hopefully seeing the light at the end of this long tunnel. I hope.
Yep.
Knock on wood. Let's hope.
Yeah, really.
So we're almost out of time, and I wanted to pivot a little bit back to you, because you've talked a lot about your passions with your professional life, but all of us have a life outside of work. So what sort of hobbies or interests do you have when you're not being the big bad risk assessor for Selective?
Oh man, I would never describe myself as a big bad risk assessor. I hope nobody does.
I had to use it though. I've been waiting.
Yeah, no, I'm always, I'm just a final note on that is I always am really happy when I walk out of a survey and somebody says something along the lines of, "Oh, that wasn't nearly as bad as I expected." That I take a lot of pride in that, because it is a challenge sometimes to have. I mean, who wants to talk to the insurance inspector? Nobody does, and I understand that coming in. So I think I'm getting better. I still have work to do, but I think I'm getting better at positioning myself as a team member of theirs rather than an inspector.
That's how I sometimes feel when I walk out of the accountant. Like,
yeah. But yeah, as far as other interests and hobbies, I would say interests, kind of a lot of things. And if you ask me 6 months from now, they might change. But world history, I've become more interested in the past 4 or 5 years, as well as economics, and personal finance and things like that. There's kind of some of these topics that I think are not only interesting, but also really important to learn about, because they can kind of shape, I don't know if political is the right word, but just kind of your philosophical beliefs on how the world is running compared to how it should be running. And that could go to how the US is running, how your state is running, how your local community is running. There's a lot of different things to learn from human history, as well as just economics and what we can do to improve the lives of ourselves and those around us. And then hobbies, I would say the biggest one that I've been into recently is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I started doing that a couple of years ago, mainly stemming from having 2 older brothers that at different times in our lives they were able to beat up on me, so I'm trying to position myself to be able to beat up on them a little bit. But it's a really fun sport. It's like a physical puzzle to solve, and so I really enjoy doing that.
And were you able to keep that up when did you just do it at home when everything was closed down, or did you just take a hiatus?
Yeah, so I took a hiatus for I think 14 months, which was tough because it was about 4 or 5 months after I started, and I was really catching the bug and starting to catch on and not just getting destroyed by everyone at my gym. But thankfully, one of my older brothers, he wrestled in high school, and he was living at home with me at the time. So I bought a couple of mats from Amazon, and they showed up, and I would literally set them up in my backyard, and me and him would just kind of go at it. So it was me and him. So there wasn't too much of a variety of people I got to face, but it was definitely better than nothing. So
I
yeah.
love that. So, if you were to go back to yourself, Riley in high school, when you're applying to colleges and, choosing your degree, would you follow the same path or would you do anything differently?
I think I would follow the same path. There wasn't really, like, especially in high school, I don't really think I had much of a choice in terms of what paths I was going to go to. I enjoyed math and I was good at it. So I look at the other potential routes and it's like, yeah, could I have potentially done something? Maybe. But I think in general, it would be the same type of path. Now, what I would say to myself is pay more attention in history, because I'm only now realizing how important that stuff is. When I was in middle school and high school, I would be in history classes and English classes, and I would just be thinking to myself, I'm never going to use this. I'm never going to use this. It's not applicable. I'm going to use my math, and that stuff will be applicable to the real world, but none of this is going to be applicable. And come to find out, I really wish that I paid more attention in those classes, because so much of where our future as a civilization could go is based on so much stuff that has already happened in history. So I guess I would just kind of, as a general education thing, I would tell myself to pay more attention in those classes. But in general, I think I would have ended up on the same path.
I could probably give myself that same advice too. Those classes were always the most painful for me. I took it as like just write everything down and then memorize it.
Right.
And had I taken a different approach, because I think the people who are really good in history and philosophy and those types of classes, like, didn't just put it all down and memorize it. They like listened and like thought about it. Whereas I was more like, I need to know all the dates. I had to memorize everything.
Oh, I was the exact same way. Yeah. You have like a false sense of why you're learning this stuff. You kind of just think, okay, well, you just have to kind of pay respect to what's happened in the past. So we're going to learn history, but it's actually a lot more than that. So yeah, I just wish I paid a little bit more attention in those areas.
Yeah. Although I have advice for the people who are very good at history. I'm like, well, pay more attention to math because it's really fun.
I agree. That's how I've always thought. Why are you guys not, joining more math classes or computer science? There's a lot of fun puzzles to solve. But again,
it's all
not
puzzles.
not everyone thinks that way. And when we need the people that think in other ways. So
yeah, it's funny when I talk to like other lawyers about taking the LSAT, because the logic portion of it, it's all math games. They're like, oh, that logic section was worse. I'm like, that was the best section. It was just a whole section of games like that we just need to figure out.
It's really funny that you mentioned that, because now that I'm thinking about your last question, like, would you change career paths potentially? I have always had an interest in law, and I think part of that is because I grew up in a family, especially on my dad's side, that is, we have a lawyer, we have doctors, we have engineers, and the conversations that I experienced at holiday parties and things like that were always so logic based, and I would watch people go at it, and it was so fun to me to just watch some very smart people talk about very important things. So I got kind of, I think, good at arguing. And I've even had a lot of my friends say, Riley, you really should be a judge, because you're really good at viewing, 10 different arguments and looking at them objectively and kind of deciding which one makes the most sense. So I would laugh that off for years. But I think about 2 years ago, I just went online and I just Googled LSAT, and I wanted to take a practice exam. And that's the exact same impression that I got from that exam, is this is fun. Yeah. So I took a few LSAT practice exams, and I was like, this really is just kind of like solving some puzzles. Yeah. So I don't know if that's the right reason to be interested in law, but I have always had that interest in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
So if I ever decide to make a career change, I'll count on you for guidance.
Well, I'm telling you, you're in a great space, if I'm not encouraging you to change your career path, but your background would fit very well into like a product liability defense type, or even on a plaintiff side, but like your knowledge of engineering and products and risk, you would be, leaps and bounds ahead of others. So
yeah, that's
if you're
interesting.
ever bored,
No, yeah. No, I think I'll be in the insurance industry for the near future, certainly. But yeah, no, like I said, it's always interesting to have these conversations, and that's one of the biggest things I love about this job is the amount that you learn about other industries. It allows you to connect with more people, because I don't know what your day to day looks like, but there is some common ground and some overlap in the topics that you discuss. So it's always cool to be able to meet people and have something to talk about and learn from.
Absolutely. And, and that's one thing I mention, or it comes up a lot is, and I think I already mentioned here with insurance and in the legal world, like every day is so different because, depending on what case you get in, you have to learn about something totally new. Depending on what insured you have to learn about a business and a product that's totally new. And you and now at those, your family gatherings, you have so much more things to bring into those debates because all these little random specifics about products and businesses, and now you have all the history background too, because you're now a history buff too, so you have
Oh
a
my
lot
God.
to
Well,
add.
yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I hope to someday be a history buff, but it's crazy. The more you learn, the more you realize that you know so little. So it points you in another direction. It's like, wow, they mentioned this. I've never even heard of that. I'm going to go do a deep dive into that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it seems like a never ending cycle, but yeah, there's plenty to learn always. So I'm glad to be in a career that allows me to sort of pursue a lot of different interests.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, everything that you could about, what your day looks like and what you're looking for in a risk mitigation lens. I like, as I said to you before you came on the podcast, I love the idea of having you come on just because I on my end deal with like risk after the fact and and how to deal with it there, and to have you on the front end, walking in on it, doing a site visit thing. Here's a problem here, there's a problem here, or this looks great. I mean, it's like full circle for me. So I love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. This was a fun conversation. And I'm sure we'll continue to stay in touch, and I'll definitely let you know how Blackie's hot dogs are. And if I ever become more interested in law, I'll definitely be reaching out. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. And for our listeners, if you like what you hear, always you can subscribe to the Defense Never Rests on Apple Podcasts, and you can now find us on YouTube at the Defense Never Rests.